Hey everybody, it's Dana and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be working on our very first card for the Valentine's Day card series of 2023. I can't believe it's already 2023, but let's go ahead and get into the card. So today I'm going to be using this beautiful background stamp called a Tossed Heart from Simon Says Stamp. I think it's a great background stamp. We're also going to be using some Simon Says ink in Carnation, Peony, and Cherry. I want a good blend of pinks and reds for this card. That's what's going to create our background. So I'm going to start off with some white cardstock. This is Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock for this. And I'm also going to grab a piece of scratch paper so I can do my ink blending. Now, this ink blending does not need to be perfect. I just want to put on some of the colors and make sure that they're overlapping. Because that background is very large and only certain sections are going to be shown, I can actually lay this color down like really randomly and not be too concerned about how the colors mix. So I first came in with my softest color, and I'm going to use that same exact brush, and I'm going to move on to the darker color. Now with these two colors on the screen, they might look like they look exactly alike, but one is just a tad bit darker and one is a tad bit lighter. So as I start building up this color, you should be able to see all three colors. Next, I'm going to come in with that cherry, and I did swap out my brush here to my red brush instead of my pink brush. But if you only had one brush, you can definitely use all three of these colors with just one brush. But in between the colors, I would definitely clean it off. So as you can see, I came in with that red. Again, you guys, this looks a hot mess, but I promise you this is going to make such a beautiful card. I'm going to work my way backwards through those colors just to make sure that I have good coverage of this ink. And also I'm trying not to see any of the white. Now, before I go back into that softer color, I do want to clean off my brush because I don't want to contaminate my ink pads. And I'll just go back in and fill in the rest of these areas. Again, like I said, if you were just putting this on a card, I would be like, oh, I'm making a mess here. But again, using the tossed heart as this large background element is really going to make this beautiful. Now, once I had all the color on there, I did want to add a little bit of something to it. So I went ahead and I grabbed my white iridescent shimmer spray from Hero Arts, and I'm just going to spritz a little bit of that on. That's just going to give me like a pearlized iridescent little background for all of those hearts that we're going to end up seeing in the stamp. So look how gorgeous that is. Now, before I do anything else, I do want to make sure that I heat set this because I do want to emboss on this, and I need to make sure, one, the ink is dry as well as that spray. And once I dried, it did lighten up just a tad bit, and I believe that's because I put the shimmer spray on there and it kind of pulled the color down. But look how pretty that is. Now we're going to come in and we're going to bring in that large stamp. Now, I do want to make sure though, before I set this down, that this is dry. So I'm going to be careful and lift this right back off of the grid mat. I am using the sticky grid mat as well to keep this in place when I place down the larger stamp on top. But I did want to test this before I went ahead and started stamping just to make sure this is dry. So I'm using Hero Arts gold embossing powder. And as you can see, I can put this on here, flick it off, and none of it's sticking. So now I know I can go ahead and put the background on this. I'll go and put that gold embossing powder to the side. I can place this right back on my sticky mat. Now, if you didn't have the sticky mat, you can certainly still use these background stamps. But to me, it kind of makes it easier if I can pull the paper away from the side of my MISTI. Another way to do this is to put the stamp in the MISTI, put your paper on top with a little bit of tape behind it, stick it onto the lid, and you can stamp that way. I'll link a video up here. I believe it's in my background videos where I can show you how to just put your paper on the lid and stamp as well. I did make sure to use some anti-static on here just to make sure nothing sticks. And I'm going to use my Versamark. So as you can see, this stamp is large and the hearts are like recessed into the stamp. So that's the part that's going to be colored on this background. Not so much the lines and everything, because those are going to be stamped in gold. I am going to make sure everything is tucked into the corner of my MISTI. And you know what? I'm thinking I might want to move that up. But first, I'm just going to see where this lands. Because this is such a large background and the paper is kind of sized right to it. See how it covers it all up? And I'm not going to have a space to like kind of hold to make sure I can heat set it. So I decided to raise this up just a little bit so I can give myself an area where I can hold my paper. Now I did know in advance that it was going to cut this down, but if you weren't going to cut this down, just go ahead and line the stamp over everything and you'll be able to find a corner that you can just hold on to go ahead and get all your embossing powder on there. Again, I already have sketched this card out and we're actually going to make 2 cards out of this background. So I know that I can waste a little bit of that top and still be okay. I did make sure to double ink this up because remember, if you stamp this and you go to put your embossing powder on it and it's not stamped fully, your embossing powder is not going to stick. So that's just a little tip. Now I can go ahead and gently peel this off of my mat. I kind of like peel the mat back first, grab a hold of the paper, and then I can go ahead and pull it off. Now it's time to add that gold embossing powder. Now this gold embossing powder is going to look fabulous with this background we created. So I'm just going to hold it in the area that does not have anything stamped on it. And then I can go ahead and pour this over my image. I like to kind of put a lot at the top and then kind of like tap it down and get it to cover most of my image. Now I will have to go back in there and place some more of that gold embossing powder, but at this point I got the majority of it covered. So I make sure to do that one more time to make sure I catch all of that area. Any excess I can flick off. Now because that paper was dried, and I use my anti-static, I really don't have anything left in those heart-shaped areas. Now I can just go ahead and heat emboss this. Now when you're heat embossing, my biggest tip is to get your gun nice and hot before you bring it to your paper. Once we put, the embossing powder on these tossed hearts, we want to make sure that we get a good impression. I like sometimes to start from the back to warm up that embossing powder and then bring it to the front. And by doing that as well, you're not really blowing any of that embossing powder off of the image. It kind of sticks a little bit because it's already heated from the back. Now, my gun was really, really nice and hot. So as you can see, I'm getting a perfect coverage on this. And I'm kind of going a little bit slow because it is such a large area with like thicker lines. I just want to make sure that I get everything evenly melted. All right, I'm just going to finish off the top corner, and you'll know when it's melted because it's shiny. When it's not melted, it's dull. So I set that aside and look how gorgeous this background is. See how gorgeous those hearts look by adding those 3 colors? It really gives us a little bit of dimension on our card. Absolutely perfect. Now I did know I want to cut a heart in the middle of this, but the first thing I wanted to do was trim down this paper because remember I said I had already sketched out this paper and I know that this piece is going to be smaller when I bring it to my panel. So what I like to do when I'm using these background stamps is to kind of trim off on all 4 sides. I'm going to do like at the top, the 2 sides, and the bottom. And that way I kind of make sure that I get the image even. Sometimes when we're working with these background stamps, we might end up shifting it a little bit. So this is just a good practice. Now, if you wanted to have this, the full size of a card panel, the first thing I would do is just get a larger piece of paper when you stamp, and then you can trim down. So at this point, I'm just going to see which one of these hearts are going to fit, and it's going to give me a nice evenness on both sides of my card. If my heart is too big, I'm not going to be able to have any sides. And what I mean by size is just to make sure that the heart doesn't run off the paper and it's kind of even in the middle of the panel. Now I can go ahead and run this through my die cut machine. So I have a white card base here, and I want to show you how pretty this looks. Look how gorgeous that is. I have a nice white border around. Now, if I wanted to, I can just place the heart right back on top. But now I have an opportunity to have two Valentine's Day cards with stamping only one image. I like this because I like all the white space on this card. So for the stamp set I'm using today, it is the Love You Greetings from Simon Says Stamp. I love this because it has really beautiful sentiments in it, but the lines of the bolder words are like really soft. And I think that looks so pretty with a simple card like this. So I'm going to grab the Happy Valentine's Day, and I'm going to place this at the bottom of the card. Again, this is going to be a very clean and simple card. Lots and lots of white space here. Now, what's so great, if you were to do this card again, meaning the background, while you have this stamp set out, make multiple colors, and then you have multiple Valentine's Day cards. Or if you wanted to, you can use a smaller heart and see if you can get two hearts out of that one piece of paper. So remember, your options are open when you're using these larger background stamps. I think this is such a very clean and simple card. And I think just making these kind of simple cards for Valentine's Day really can pick up your mojo. Now, in order to get this straight, I did want to bring in my grid mat. And my grid mat's just going to help me get that Happy Valentine's Day lined up on the card. I do like that the Valentine's is longer and the Happy and the day is right underneath it. I think that's such a pretty way to start off our Valentine's Day cards. Now I'll put my heart back on there, and my heart is just there for placement purposes right now. I can line it up and make sure that everything is lined up. Excuse my curly hair, but I had to kind of like really get over this image. And then I can go ahead and close my lid, and I know that that sentiment is going to be straight. Now, a tip when using these sentiments that have thinner lines, I would suggest to stamp these sentiments multiple times with light pressure. And the reason I'm saying that is sometimes when we have these kind of thinner lines in our sentiments, we go to push down too hard and it kind of blooms out the sentiment. When I say bloom, it kind of like stretches the lines a little bit. So as you can see, I'm just lightly rubbing over this. I don't get a good stamp the first time. So I like to just kind of build this up. Even if I have to stamp it 2-3 times, I do know that those tinier words with happy and day aren't going to be smudged, where it might make it a little bit harder for you to read. So I have this here, and I think I want to get it a tad bit darker. So I am using my Hero Arts Intensified Black ink. And now I can lightly rub that over, and I know that my sentiment is not going to have that bloom effect. Almost like when I say bloom, it almost looks blurry. All right, now we can go ahead and start putting this card together. Look how pretty this is. A very clean and simple card with lots and lots of white space. And I know a lot of people like white space, and this is a perfect way to do a simple Valentine's Day card. Now, I could have put this card on some foam tape, but instead I had the heart out already. I already had scrap pieces of paper left over from other projects. I'm just going to build this up. And if you have these kind of dies and you can die cut the images to build up your top image, I think that look works and looks a little bit cleaner than if you put foam tape. Now you of course can put foam tape on the back, it would not make a difference. But to me, if I have the coordinating dies to my stamp sets, or like in this case, I just have large hearts, I do like to use paper to stack them, because sometimes when you mail and you might not have enough foam tape, you might get some divots or like gaps. So I just make sure to use a coordinating die because it just makes it easier. Now I can pop on that top layer, make sure I have everything lined up correctly. Now, I would love to see your Valentine's Day cards. Let me know in the comments below, do you keep it clean and simple, or do you like to add a lot of stuff to your Valentine's Day card? So remember, this is only day one of the card series. I'm going to have different ways to jazz up those Valentine's Day cards. And I am going to be switching up my color palette because I believe just because it's Valentine's Day, it does not need to always be red and pink. Do a Valentine's Day card in monochromatic colors. That could be really pretty. I actually like a nice striking black, white, and red card for Valentine's Day because I just think it's like a priceless color combination. Look how gorgeous this is. Now I do want to kind of like round off those corners so it kind of mirrors the heart. So I do have my crocodile here, and I haven't used this thing in forever, but I'm so glad I kept it. If you don't have a crocodile and you just had a corner rounder, I think they're called corner chompers, that would work as well. All right, that is card number one. Let's set this aside and start working on card number two. Again, white card base, Nina Solar White. This is 110 pound. And we have, again, a lot of white space here. So right in the middle is where I'm going to place my sentiment. Now, again, with the love you greetings, there are multiple sentiments in here that can fit into this size heart. So at this point, I'm just trying to figure out which one I want to place in here. Now, if your heart was smaller, you will obviously have to go with a smaller sentiment. But in my case, it's a good size heart, and I can really fill this up with one of the sentiments. At first, I thought I wanted to do the sentiment that said, you're my person. Because number one, I've never seen that in a stamp set, and I think it's brilliant because that could be for your husband, and that can also be for a friend. You know, like I have what I consider my people, my little group of friends that I love to death. And so they're like my person. So this kind of set can also be used for something that's not Valentine's Day. All right, I did use some liquid adhesive to place on the back of this. And I like to use the liquid adhesive because it gives me a tad bit of wiggle room to get my card centered correctly. Now, if you wanted to, you could trace out the heart so you knew where your sentiment's gonna go. But in this case, I know that the sentiments in this stamp set are going to fit nicely in the middle of this heart. So I'll bring back in my Misty. And as I was putting this card together, I started to look and think, I'm not sure if that's the sentiment I want. So I'm gonna line it up one more time. And at this point, I decided it didn't fill up the heart enough for me. I do love the white space, but I felt like I can grab a different sentiment and just fill up that space just a little bit more. So that is what's so good about having this already glued on. I can interchange those sentiments actually before I stamp them. So all I have to do at this point is just line this up. I'm going to do the same exact thing that I did with the other sentiment. First, I'm going to make sure to line it up. I'm going to make sure it's even on all parts of the heart. And then I can go ahead and stamp this. But again, it's a very thin line. So I'm being careful, and I'm going to stamp this very lightly the first time. So when I close my lid, I'm being really gentle and just rubbing that over. Now, it might look like I'm doing it really hard, but I'm not. So I'll go ahead and press that down. And again, I'm doing love taps on this. I'm not pressing hard. That's what I should probably call them. When you're doing thinner lines, do love taps. Don't be heavy-handed. Just kind of like softly tap it. And I'm just rubbing my fingers over it again because I don't want this sentiment to bloom. And I think that looks perfect just stamping it 2 times. All right, so we have 2 cards made today with using just 1 background stamp and 1 sentiment stamp and 1 die. That's all we used. I did think about adding some black lines around the hearts, but you know what? I like it this way and I don't want to add anything else to it. All right, everybody, that is going to wrap up day 1. Look how gorgeous this card is. I will be back with another video to share with you guys a little bit later in the week. Until I see you again, stay safe and stay creative. I'll see you in another video soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.